The next warning sign emerges when the Federal Reserve and other central banks step back in to purchase debt. Each return to intervention marks a dangerous point in the cycle. The risk only deepens when the next economic downturn arrives. My generation has unfortunately presided over an era in which debt has ballooned, infrastructure has decayed, and the future has been borrowed against. Debt restructuring and the massive renovation required to restore balance are not measured simply in money. Money itself is only a tool for productivity. What matters is the labor, the sacrifice, and the output required to overcome a mounting deficit. Yet we have avoided confronting it. At its core, the system is simple. There are debtors and there are creditors, and the system must function for both. The act of lending must be rewarded. For every loan given, there must be compensation sufficient to justify the risk. When debt accumulates, it creates an obligation not just to repay the principal, but also the interest in real terms. Without this balance, no one will lend, and the entire system collapses. Throughout history, societies have faced two choices: repay in hard money of real value, or inflate the debt away by printing more currency. Across civilizations, the same pattern emerges. From the ancient biblical jubilee to modern economies, debt inevitably rises relative to income, until the burden of servicing it becomes unsustainable. In our time, we face high debt service costs that will only increase as deficits expand and obligations grow. If creditors do not receive adequate returns, they will sell. The danger is not just in the new debt being issued, but in the vast pool of existing debt that could suddenly be dumped into the market. The imbalance between what must be sold and what can be purchased grows perilous. When such moments arrive, central banks attempt to rescue the system by printing money. They call it monetization. But the act of creating money to buy debt erodes its value. Compensation to creditors deteriorates, and the currency weakens. This is the inescapable mechanic of the cycle. Consider Japan, where the printing of extraordinary amounts of money caused the yen to fall sharply. Japanese bondholders lost roughly 80% of their purchasing power. This is the cost of debt monetization. The United States now faces a similar path. Debt service costs are rising, while government revenues remain locked by fixed entitlement obligations. The squeeze on consumption will grow more visible. If bondholders begin to sell, the fragility of the system will be laid bare. The next signal to watch is when the Federal Reserve returns to buying again. That moment will mark a red flag, a sign that the system is buckling. From there, the next true test will come during the following economic downturn. Based on historical cycles, lasting 7 years on average, such a downturn could emerge within the next 4 to 5 years. In this environment, the question becomes how to preserve wealth. A combination of gold and inflation-indexed bonds stands as a prudent defense. Gold carries unique advantages. It is largely uncorrelated, sometimes even negatively correlated, with other assets, making it an effective diversifier. Its history as a war option is clear. When conflict arises, and nations refuse to lend even to allies, gold remains the neutral store of value. Throughout the 1970s and 1930s, equities struggled, while hard assets like gold maintained strength. Today, central banks themselves are buyers of gold, recognizing its role as the world's third-largest reserve currency. Yet, in most institutional and individual portfolios, gold and other inflation-hedging assets remain underweighted. The lesson is not to place faith in one asset alone, but to diversify intelligently. Gold, paired with inflation-indexed bonds, provides balance. The two are only 16% correlated, complementing one another across volatile conditions. Together, they offer resilience in an uncertain future, a hedge against both inflation and currency devaluation. But even beyond gold, investors must pay attention to what truly preserves purchasing power. Productivity, innovation, and real assets matter most in the long run. Currency can be printed endlessly, but land, commodities, and the output of human labor hold intrinsic value. That is why, when nations drift toward monetization and fiscal imbalance, wealth often flees into tangible assets. Cycles of debt have shaped empires and toppled them. The Roman Empire debased its currency until coins became worthless bronze. In the Weimar Republic of the 1920s, savings were obliterated when inflation turned wages into meaningless paper. In each case, a powerful state believed it could bend economic law, but reality was not so easily manipulated. We now stand at a familiar point in that long cycle. The United States holds a unique privilege. the dollar as the world's reserve currency. But even that strength is not immune to the mathematics of debt. Foreign buyers hold vast amounts of US treasuries, yet their willingness is not guaranteed. If confidence falters, if selling accelerates, the dollar itself will come under strain. And confidence, once lost, is not easily regained. It is the most fragile element in finance. Central banks can buy time, but they cannot manufacture faith. When too much debt piles up, when interest costs rise too steeply, when governments appear unable to restore balance, markets eventually revolt. The challenge ahead is clear. The world cannot grow its way out of debt if productivity lags. Borrowing without real out, put to match, is merely reshuffling the future into the present. The bill always comes due. This is why history's great debt cycles often end not in repayment, but in restructuring, inflation, or collapse. Each option carries pain. Restructuring requires creditors to take losses. Inflation robs savers quietly, eating away at the value of every dollar. Collapse destroys both. Modern policymakers prefer inflation, subtle and politically convenient. It allows leaders to claim debts are being met, even as the currency shrinks in value. But inflation also erodes social trust. Citizens feel cheated when their savings buy less, when their wages lag behind prices, when their promises prove empty. And so, society itself becomes strained. Political extremes rise, tests fill streets, confidence in institutions wanes. Economic cycles do not exist in isolation. They echo into politics, into culture, into the stability of nations. Yet there is opportunity too. For those who prepare, who diversify, who study the lessons of history, cycles become less destructive. They can be weathered, even turned to advantage. Investors who held gold in the 1970s or inflation-linked bonds in the 2000s found protection while others suffered. Those who positioned portfolios across real assets, rather than relying solely on financial paper, preserved their strength. The path ahead demands the same discipline. No single bet will save a generation from debt. No shortcut will erase the obligations that have piled up. But balance, preparation, and perspective can blunt the impact. This is not alarmism. It is simply the rhythm of economic history. Every cycle ends. Every system reaches a breaking point. The question is not whether, but when and how prepared you will be when it comes. As interest burdens rise, governments face impossible choices. Do they cut spending and risk political backlash? Do they raise taxes and risk slowing growth? Or do they print more money and risk losing credibility altogether? Each path carries its own consequences, and none offer an easy escape. In recent years, the printing press has become the favored tool. Trillions in stimulus, quantitative easing, emergency relief. Each program justified in the moment, but each adding another layer to the mountain of debt. The logic is simple. Immediate survival over long-term prudence. But survival cannot be bought indefinitely. Already, whispers circulate of a looming reset. Not a collapse in the streets, but a gradual restructuring of the system itself. Higher inflation targets quietly accepted. Debt maturities extended further into the future. Central banks subtly coordinating with governments, blurring the line between fiscal and monetary policy. It is not announced in speeches, but revealed in balance sheets. This is the grey zone of economic history, when nations refuse to admit default. Yet reality forces them to shift the rules of the game. Investors see it. Savers feel it. Workers live it. The wealth divide grows as those with assets thrive, while those relying on wages fall further behind. The cycle feeds resentment, and resentment fuels instability. But the lessons remain timeless. When money itself is in doubt, power flows to what cannot be conjured by decree. Land, food, energy, commodities, technologies that enhance productivity. Gold and silver may not yield dividends, but they endure when paper promises wither. Yet even here, vigilance is required. History shows that during the darkest financial storms, governments often seize what they cannot create. Capital controls, windfall taxes, restrictions on movement of wealth. In times of desperation, leaders turn inward, prioritizing survival of the state over the liberty of the individual. This is why cycles of debt are not merely financial. They are deeply human. They test patience, courage, and foresight. Those who ignore them are swept away. Those who prepare endure. The United States is not Rome, not Weimar, not Argentina. But it is not exempt from the mathematics of debt, either. The same gravity applies to all. And as the storm builds, one truth rings clear. Debt is not just an economic number. It is a measure of trust. When it grows too heavy, that trust begins to fracture. And when trust breaks, nations themselves begin to shake. The story of debt is also the story of resilience. Every collapse, every crisis, has carried within it seeds of renewal. After Rome, Europe rebuilt under new systems of trade. After Weimar, Germany rose again with discipline and reform. Even after the Great Depression, America emerged stronger, with lessons that shaped decades of prosperity. So too, the debt cycle now approaching its peak is not the end of civilization. It is another turning point, another test of adaptability, another chance to decide what must be preserved and what must be abandoned. For individuals, the path is practical. Diversify across assets, safeguard liquidity, and never mistake speculation for safety. For nations, the path is harder. Discipline in spending, clarity in communication, and courage to face pain now, rather than defer it endlessly. The longer the reckoning is delayed, the harsher it becomes when it arrives. In the end, the United States still commands unmatched strengths. Its innovation, its natural resources, its global alliances, its entrepreneurial spirit. But strengths can be squandered if leaders cling to illusions of infinite borrowing. A reserve currency does not last forever simply because it once existed. It lasts only as long as the world believes in it. And so, the cycle turns once more. Interest rises, deficits grow, tensions climb. The questions are not abstract. They will shape every retirement account, every grocery bill, every mortgage payment. They will shape politics, elections, and the trust people place in their institutions. History tells us what happens when leaders ignore the limits. It tells us what happens when societies pretend the bill will never come due. But history also shows what can happen when wisdom prevails, when discipline returns, when truth is faced rather than deferred. That is the crossroads before us now. The debt is real. The cycle is mature. The choices are narrowing. But in the end, the future does not belong to debt itself. It belongs to those who prepare for what comes after. Because while debt can destroy wealth, it cannot destroy human resilience. And in that resilience lies the hope that when this cycle ends, as all cycles do, a stronger foundation can rise from the rubble.